Hello. Hello.
Hello.
Hi, Thomas. I just made you a co-host so you can share your screen and things like that.
Okay. Right. Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. That's nice.
Looks good.
Okay. Okay. Is it working?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
Okay. Perfect.
So, I don't know. Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon. Yeah. Are you in France or are you in?
Yeah. I'm back to France actually.
So it's 7:30 where you are.
Yeah, exactly.
But thanks for doing this. It's such an awkward hour.
It's not that late.
Let's wait a few minutes before getting started.
No problem.
Yeah, so I have to say I was aware of this problem that before you solved it with Baptiste, and it's just very interesting. Whoa. Okay.
Okay.
Great. So, well, are you ready to get started? Maybe we should go ahead and people will trickle in. Okay, well, we're happy to have Thomas Budzinski talk about local limits of uniform triangulations in hygienus.
Okay, so hello everyone. It's a pleasure to speak here. So I'm going to talk to you about some properties of random triangulations when the genus gets very high, when the genus is proportional to the size. So first, let me define what I'm calling a triangulation, and then we will see what happens when we pick these objects uniformly at random. So to get triangulation, I need a finite set of faces. So I need a set of 2n faces, which are going to be triangles. And to get a triangulation, I'm going to take my 2n triangles and glue the sides 2 by 2 in such a way that I get a connected and orientable surface. So for example, if I do the gluing, which is on the picture here, this is the surface that I'm going to get. So on this example, I get a surface of genus 0, which is just a sphere. I don't have any hole in my surface. And in general, I could get a surface of with G holes, and G is the genus of my triangulation. So for technical reasons, in this talk, I'm only going to consider triangulations of type 1, which means that it's allowed to glue together 2 edges of the same triangle. For example, this happens once in the picture, in this triangle in the middle. And the consequence is that in my triangulation on the right, I get a loop, which is an edge joining a vertex to itself. And also for technical reasons, all the triangulations that I'm going to consider are going to be rooted, which means that there is one special oriented edge, which is the one in red on my picture. And this is going to be important later because it gives us a starting point if we want to kind of explore a triangulation. And finally, as you can see on the picture on the right, we can also see a triangulation as a graph with the vertices being just the vertices of my triangles. And I mean, if we forget about the faces and only remember the vertices and edges, we can also see a triangulation as a graph. All right, so let's consider the set of triangulations with a fixed size and genus. So let's say 2n faces. Of course, I need the number of faces to be even if I want an even number of sides to glue them 2 by 2. So we can consider the set of triangulations with a fixed genus G and size n, and denote by tau of ng its cardinal. It's often more natural to look at combinatorial problems before probabilistic ones, and we will see that it's very important for us probabilists in this kind of problems to have some combinatorial input. So we will be interested in the cardinality of this set of triangulations with a fixed size and genus. And for what I want to do, we will actually need something a little bit more precise. We need to understand the number of triangulations of fixed size, so n, genus G, and with an additional boundary of length p. So one of the faces will not be a triangle, but will have a perimeter p. And a natural question is, can we compute those numbers? Can we compute the number of triangulations, say, with a fixed size and genus? So in the planar case, if my triangulation is planar, so if G is equal to 0, there are exact formulas which have been well known since the 60s and the work of Tutt. So there is a relatively simple formula for the number of triangulations of the sphere with a fixed size, and then we can use the Stirling formula to get some precise asymptotics. And there are also explicit formulas if we add the boundaries. So we have all the combinatorics that we need in the planar case. On the other hand, in the general case, so if n and g can be anything, the best that is known are double recurrence relations. So in particular, there is a formula by Goulden and Jackson that will appear a bit later in the talk. So in theory, these recursions are sufficient to compute tau of ng for any n and g, so to count triangulations with any size and any genus. But in practice, it's a little bit difficult to extract information from these. In particular, no closed formula is known for the number of triangulations of size n and genus g, and it's even a bit difficult to extract asymptotics. So it's possible to get asymptotics if the size goes to infinity, but the genus is fixed. So if the genus is non-zero, but still very small. but when both the size and the genus go to infinity, it's much more difficult, and we will see that this is a big problem. All right, so now I'm going to start doing a little bit of probability. And first, I'm going to explain what happens in the planar case. So if G is equal to 0, and we've seen that in this case, we have a lot of information coming from combinatorists. So the point of view that I'm going to be interested in today is local convergence, which is also known as Benjamini-Schramm convergence. So the local topology will be a topology on the set of either finite or infinite triangulations. So an infinite triangulation is just going to be a gluing of an infinite number of triangles. So the local topology is a topology in which two triangulations T and T prime are close if there is a large ball around the root. So let me recall that I had a red edge on my picture, which is the root. I can consider the ball of radius r around this root in a triangulation, which is just the set of vertices at graph distance at most r from the root. And I'm going to say that two triangulations T and T prime are close if there is a large ball around the root which coincides in T and in T prime.
So what's the notion of the radius here? I mean, the triangles are combinatorial triangles. I mean, what's the distance here? Are these triangles metric triangles? Or you just think of as
when you say the distance, do you mean the distance used to define the ball, or
the ball? Okay, yeah, what's the radius r?
It's the distance for the graph distance.
Okay.
So, for example, we can think of this ball as we take the set of vertices at graph distance at most r from the starting point of the root edge, and then we add all the edges, all the faces incident to these vertices, for example.
Thanks.
Okay, so now a very natural idea for a probabilist is to take a triangulation uniformly at random among all the triangulations with size n and genus G. This is what I call TNG. And in the planar case, we have the following result of Engel and Schramm, which was one of the starting points of the theory of random planar maps. Uniform triangulations of size n and genus 0, so triangulations of the sphere, converge in distribution when the size goes to infinity to this big T, which is an infinite triangulation of the plane. So this is what we call the UIPT, for uniform infinite planar triangulation. It can be seen in some sense, so of course, it does not make immediate sense to talk about a uniform infinite triangulation of the plane because there are infinitely many such triangulations, but it's quite natural to try to approximate this using finite objects. And when the size goes to infinity, what we see gets close to this object, and I will show a picture of what it looks like in a few slides. Yeah, maybe I'll show you the picture first and explain where this result comes from after. So this is a uniform triangulation of the sphere with about 30,000 faces. So as you can see, it's not. It does not look at all like, for example, a portion of the regular triangular lattice. It's a much rougher object with kind of fractal properties. So here, this is the whole object. And if we are interested in local convergence, it means that we are looking at the neighborhood of a typical point in this surface. Okay, so to get an idea of what the local limit is, we need to zoom on the neighborhood of a typical point here, and what we will see is going to be something like that. So again, we see that it's a quite irregular object with fractal-like properties, and this can also be seen as a sample of the UIPT, so this infinite limit of uniform triangulations.
Sorry, can I ask a question?
Yeah, of course.
How is the geometry of the triangles chosen in that picture?
So that's a good question. So I think on this one, indeed, if we want to represent a planar map, we also need to choose an embedding in the three-dimensional space or in the plane. I think, so here it was just computed by Mathematica. And I think the way that Mathematica does this is that it does as if the edges were strings, and the vertices were positive charges. So there is kind of a repulsion force and also an attraction force, and at equilibrium, this is what Mathematica obtained. Okay. And the way that this one was obtained is quite similar.
And what does it mean, uniform?
Okay, so for the finite objects, there is a finite number of triangulations with a fixed size and a fixed genus, because we start from a finite number of faces, so we have only finitely many ways to glue them together. And among all of these, we pick one uniformly at random.
Okay, thank you.
And for the infinite object, I'm calling it uniform, but it's a slight abuse of language. Okay, so now I'm going to give a very quick idea of where this result of Engel and Schramm comes from. So if we're interested in the neighborhood of the root, what we want to understand is the probability. If I take some finite triangulation T, so some finite piece T with, let's say, V faces in total and perimeter P. So this is a small triangulation with a boundary. And I want to understand the probability that the neighborhood of the root is isomorphic to this little t. Okay, so I want to understand what the neighborhood of the root looks like. And for this, I'm fixing a small triangulation T, and I want to know the probability for the neighborhood of the root, for a neighborhood of the root to be isomorphic to this little t. But since my triangulation Tn0 is uniform among all the triangulations of the sphere with size n, this probability is just the number of finite triangulations of size n containing this little t divided by the total number of triangulations of the sphere of size n. And these are two combinatorial quantities that we know how to compute. So more precisely, the denominator is the number of triangulations of the sphere with size n. So this is something that has been computed by Tutt. Oops, sorry. And the numerator is the number of triangulations containing my little t. But if I have a little triangulation T with a hole, the number of triangulations containing this little piece as a neighborhood of the root is the number of ways to fill the hole of my little piece T in such a way that the number of faces is the right one. So I need to fill my little piece T with a triangulation with n minus v faces, because I have n faces overall and v faces in my little piece, and with also a boundary of size p. And this is two quantities that have been computed by Tutt. So we can compute explicitly this probability in a uniform finite triangulation, and then let the size go to infinity and just compute asymptotics. Okay, so these are my pictures. Yeah, so this is what a small piece little t looks like. So in this example, I have 9 faces and a boundary of length 6. All right, so before moving on to the high genus setting, there is one specific property of the UIPT that I would like to highlight. So the UIPT is this infinite triangulation, infinite random triangulation. So let me fix again a small triangulation T with size V and perimeter P. Then what we get from Tutt is from the asymptotics and the Tutt formulas is an explicit formula for the probability that the neighborhood of the root in my infinite triangulation is isomorphic to little t. And this formula is actually pretty nice It's of the following form. It's something depending only on the perimeter multiplied by some constant, which turns out to be 1/12 square root of 3, to the power v, so to the power the size of my triangulation. So we have a kind of decoupling between the volume and the perimeter. And a very nice consequence of this formula is that if I condition on this event, so if I fix my little t and I condition on the event that I can see a copy of little t in the neighborhood of the root in my big infinite triangulation, then the law of the complement of little t, so the law of the white part here on the right, only depends on the perimeter, which means that if I have already explored this little piece, I can completely forget about the number of vertices inside and also about the geometry of what happened inside. So this property is very nice, and it allows to explore the UIPT in a Markovian way. So let's say to explore the UIPT almost face by face, little piece by little piece. And when we do that, the perimeter is going to evolve as a Markov chain. So we have reduced the study of a complicated two-dimensional object to the study of integer-valued Markov chains, which is something that probabilists love to. So this is a very important tool in the study of the UIPT. It's been developed by Angel right after the UIPT was introduced. All right. Yeah.
In the picture that you gave of that random graph.
Yeah. You mean this one?
No, going back. The three-dimensional one, that one.
Yeah.
The long strings are, what kind of perimeters are we talking about for those long filaments?
Yeah, so these long strings corresponds to places where a small perimeter, where a substantial volume is separated from the rest by just a small perimeter. Actually, right, it can be proved that this cannot happen. This cannot happen in a too strong way. For example, it's not possible. It's not possible to have a perimeter of constant size separating two macroscopic regions, but still it's possible to have a region of size. I don't remember the exact exponent, maybe square root of n separated from the rest just by a very small bottleneck.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so this spatial Markov property is very nice, and it's one of the basic tools to study the UIPT. Now I would like to start talking about what happens in the non-planar case. So very basic things that we can say about triangulations in any genus is the Euler formula. Okay, so I have not rewritten the Euler formula, but the Euler formula tells us that if we have a triangulation and we know its genus and its number of faces, so of course we can compute the number of edges, because I had 2n triangles, so 6n sides in total, and once I have glued them 2 by 2, I get 3n edges. And by the Euler formula, we can recover the number of vertices also from the size and the genus. And the number of vertices turns out to be n plus 2 minus 2g. In particular, a triangulation can exist only if the genus is at most half of the size. So the genus cannot be arbitrarily large for a fixed size. And since we know the number of edges and the number of vertices, we can compute the average degree in a triangulation of size n and genus g. So it's just the number of half edges, so twice the number of edges divided by the number of vertices. And this is roughly 6 divided by 1 minus 2g over n. In particular, if the genus is negligible compared to the size, so if g is small compared to n, the average degree is not going to be affected by the genus. So if the genus is 0, we get 6, which is also the average degree in the Euclidean regular triangular lattice. But the interesting regime is when G over N is basically a constant that I'm going to call theta. And if theta is positive, so since G is at most N over 2, theta cannot be larger than 1/2. But when theta is positive, this average degree becomes larger than 6. And we know that if we have a regular triangulation with degrees larger than 6, then we can expect this triangulation to have to be hyperbolic in some sense. For example, the 7 regular infinite triangulation is a hyperbolic object. So we're also going to expect a kind of hyperbolic behavior. So the point here is that if we have a local limit for uniform triangulations of genus with a genus proportional to the size, we can expect the average degree in the infinite object to be also larger than 6. So it's a discrete notion of negative curvature, if you prefer. So we would expect a hyperbolic behavior. On the other hand, the UIPT, which was the local limit of triangulations of the sphere, had this very nice spatial Markov property. And it's kind of natural to also expect to have a nice spatial Markov property in a limit of triangulations with a high genus. So for this, a natural question was, if I have a random infinite triangulation of the plane satisfying a spatial Markov property similar to the one in the UIPT, what can it be? Are there a lot of random triangulations of the plane satisfying such a property? And this question was asked first by Angel and Rai for half-planar maps, and then by Curien for maps of the full plane. I'm only going to be interested in the full plane in this talk. And this led to the definition of a one-parameter family called the planar stochastic hyperbolic triangulations, or PSHIT, if we want to pronounce it in a short way. So we get a one-parameter family indexed by a parameter lambda. Lambda can range between 0 and lambda c, which is 1 over 12 square root of 3. It's the same 1 over 12 square root of 3 as a little bit earlier. In particular, for lambda equal to this extremal value 1 over 12 square root of 3, we recover the UIPT. But for lambda between 0 and lambda c, we get something quite different. So these triangulations were defined as follows. What we want is that for any small triangulation T with a perimeter P and a size V, we want to have, we want the probability to be contained in one of these PSHIT to have the same form as in the UIPT, but maybe with a different value of lambda. So in this family of random triangulations, we will have this formula very close to the one describing the UIPT. The probability to have a neighborhood of the root isomorphic to little t will be something depending only on the perimeter times lambda to the power the size. And it turns out that if we want something like that, these coefficients Cp are going to be determined by lambda and can be written explicitly. Okay, so in particular for lambda equal to lambda c, we recover the UIPT, and for lambda smaller than lambda c, it's been shown that the random triangulations that we get exhibit a lot of hyperbolicity properties. For example, the volume growth is exponential, so the ball of radius r around the root contains has size exponential in R. The simple random walk is transient and escapes from the root very quickly at positive speed, which is also something that happens, say, in the hyperbolic plane and not in the Euclidean plane. There are many infinite geodesics escaping in many different directions and so on. So we have this family of random triangulations, which exhibit both a nice spatial Markov property, just like the UIPT, but also hyperbolicity properties. Maybe I should have mentioned that, for example, for the UIPT, so for this nice object, the volume growth is of order R to the 4. So the ball of radius R for the graph distance contains R to the 4 vertices. So it's not hyperbolic at all, but it's still a much quicker growth than, for example, for regular lattice, where the growth is just quadratic. All right. Okay, so here is what these sheets look like. And here the most natural way to represent them is to try to embed them in the hyperbolic plane, because we have this very quick growth. Okay, so here is the main theorem that I wanted to talk about today, that we proved with Baptiste Louf about 2 years ago. So let's assume that the genus is going to infinity at the same speed as the size. So the genus divided by the size converges to some theta between 0 and 1/2. Theta can be equal to 0, but not to 1/2. I will explain why. Then T and G converges for the local topology to one of these sheets with a parameter lambda that is an explicit function of theta. So lambda is linked to theta by an explicit equation. So this is a result very similar to the one of Engel and Schramm, but this time for triangulations where the genus is proportional to the size. So in particular, if the genus is negligible compared to the size, then the object that we get, since it only depends on theta, the object that we get is the same as if the genus was equal to 0 all along. So we recover the UIPT. So we get the same limit for, say, g equal to square root of n and g equal to 0. So if the genus is small compared to the size, we cannot see it on the neighborhood of the root. The negative curvature will not be sufficient to affect a small neighborhood of the root. On the other hand, the other extreme case is the case where theta is equal to 1/2. And as we could see in the formula for the average degree, if theta is equal to 1/2, the average degree actually blows up. Which means that this case is actually quite degenerate. There cannot be any local limit, because if we had one, it would have to be a degenerate object where the vertices would have an infinite degree. Another remark that could be made about this result is that it might seem very surprising that we start from triangulations with a very high genus. So these are highly non-planar objects. And we might think, if I have a genus of size, let's say, if the genus is equal to, I don't know, n over 10, and I take a neighborhood of size 1,000, then I should already see some genus. If I have, I should already see some holes in it. So it might seem surprising that that the limiting object is actually planar. So the holes kind of disappear in the limit. One of the reasons why it's not that surprising is that it's a phenomenon that is already observed for simpler probabilistic models. For example, if we take uniform 3 regular graphs, then the local limit is just a complete binary tree. So again, 3 regular graphs are highly non-planar, but a complete binary tree is a very nice planar graph. So it's kind of the same phenomenon here. it means that in some sense, the genus cannot be localized in small regions of the triangulation. All right. Is there any question so far about the objects or the result? Now after that, I'm going to try to explain the ideas behind the proof. So don't hesitate if you have any question now.
Oh, I just want to have, oh, okay. Please go ahead.
Okay.
Oh, sorry. What I meant was, I think somebody else had a question and then I started butting in.
Sorry. Yeah.
Oh, I was trying to ask for the last comment. Does it mean that with high probability, these triangulations kind of have very large injectivity radius? Is that what's happening?
Exactly. So what this result means is that in a uniform triangulation around the typical vertex, the injective radius goes to infinity as the size goes to infinity. And it was actually proved very recently by Baptiste Louf that this injectivity radius is actually, with high probability, larger than a small constant times log n.
Okay.
And this is a pretty strong result because log n is also the expected, it's also the conjectured diameter, so the conjectured order of magnitude of the diameter. So it means that around the typical vertex, the injectivity radius is of the same order of magnitude as the diameter. I mean, it's not proved that the diameter is log n, but that's what's expected.
A little surprised at the parameter theta getting to be that as big as a half, because I thought that the simplest triangulation of a surface of genus G was as a 4n-gon, with appropriate edge identifications, which would give you theta equals a quarter.
No, so if we take a 4n-gon, we only have one face in the map. So this is a completely different model.
Oh, okay. It's not. Okay. Faces, not triangles. Fine.
Here, all my faces are triangles all along the talk.
Right, but if you have triangles, if you try to, the usual picture of a genus G surface as a. Oh, never mind.
Okay. So maybe
as you take the center and you make it out of 4n triangles, but you can actually make it out of.
Yeah. So maybe what you have in mind is something like starting a large polygon, triangulating this polygon uniformly at random, and then gluing the sides of this polygon together uniformly at random to get a large triangulation.
Lorenzo,
but if we do that.
Sorry to interrupt, but I think you're right, Lorenzo. It's just that his n means 2n. Right?
Yeah. So here n is half of the number of triangles.
Okay, got it. Okay.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. Okay, I had not understood.
Okay.
Yeah. Now I get it. Yeah. N is half of the number of triangles here. So the ratio between the genus and the number of triangles cannot be larger than a quarter. Yeah.
Can I ask? So first of all, this comment about the diameter is really interesting. So is this saying that somehow at most points you don't see the genus for a long time, but at some points there's going to be like lots of genus kind of hidden in some small part of the surface or something? Like what is it? Seems
yeah. But on the other hand, since you have you have exponential growth, if the diameter is say log n, when you have explored the ball of radius 1/100 times log n, the number of vertices that you have discovered is actually n to the 1/100.
Okay.
So it's in terms of radius, it's proportional to the whole diameter, but you've still only discovered a very small part of the triangulation.
And is there sort of a function Gn for which the limit is something with interesting genus in a way that you know, one can see nicely? I mean, if you take, well, I guess if you take, oh, I see. So in the case theta is 1/2.
If theta is
Okay.
1/2, if theta is
You don't-
1/2,
Yeah.
there are still many questions that you can ask, but you will not have a proper local limit because
You get infinite.
for example,
degree.
the degree of the root vertex will go to infinity with high probability.
I see. Okay. Okay.
So I'm going to spend most of the rest of the time discussing the ideas behind the proof of this result. But first, I would like to describe in some sense how we should have proved it, but how we have not proved it. The most natural idea to try to prove this is to do the same thing as in the planar case. So say we want to compute asymptotic enumeration. We want to obtain asymptotic enumeration results on the number of triangulations with fixed size and genus in this regime where G is proportional to N. But unfortunately, even though there are some recurrence relations and so on, this is something that seems very hard. But on the other hand, once we have this local convergence result, we can apply the argument of Engel and Schramm, so this old argument for the planar case, backwards, and this allowed us to obtain asymptotic enumeration results and to deduce these results from the probabilistic convergence result. So more precisely, we can obtain the limit value of the ratio between tau of n+1g and tau of ng. We can deduce this directly from our local convergence theorem. And then by multiplying a lot of these ratios together, we can obtain an asymptotic enumeration result for the number of maps with size n and genus g up to sub-exponential factors. So it's not, these are not very accurate asymptotics, but it's still, I think it's still the best that is known. So if the genus is roughly theta times n, then the number of triangulations of size n and genus g is roughly n to the 2g times the exponential of n times some function of theta. And then we have something that is sub-exponential in n, but that we don't know how to control. And this function f is pretty explicit. Okay, so it's kind of funny because usually when we want to study random maps, we rely heavily on results from combinatorists, and in this case, things kind of went the other way around. We proved the probabilistic result and used it to deduce asymptotic enumeration results. All right. So now let's describe the rough steps of the proof of this theorem. So the first part of the proof consists of getting a tightness result. It's a quite usual strategy in probability. We first get a tightness result, so the existence of limits along subsequences, and then we use some probabilistic arguments to say things about the subsequential limits, and we keep on doing that until there is only one candidate left, and in this case, the subsequential limit is unique, which means that we have a convergence. So we first prove a tightness limit, and we also prove that any subsequential limit has to be planar and one-ended. So one-ended means that we are not going to have a finite set around the root separating two infinite triangulations from each other. So it also means that we can embed the triangulation nicely in the plane in such a way that there is no accumulation point, or the only accumulation point is at infinity. The second step consists of making the following remark. If I have a uniform triangulation of fixed size and genus, it's going to be weakly Markovian in the following sense. if I take any finite piece T with a certain size and a certain perimeter, then the probability to observe this little t around the root will only depend on the perimeter and the volume. So it's a weaker version of the spatial Markov property of the OIPT, because here we have no idea what this probability could be. But we know that it can only depend on the perimeter and the volume, because this probability is given by the number of possible ways to fill the hole, and the hole has a certain perimeter. So this property passes to the limit, which means that any subsequential limit also has to be weakly Markovian. So if I consider a subsequential limit of uniform finite triangulations, it must have this property that the probability to observe a certain neighborhood of the root only depends on the perimeter and the volume. And what we proved is that if we have an infinite weakly Markovian triangulation of the plane, then it's not necessarily a psheet. So it's an immediate consequence from the definition of the psheet that the psheet satisfies this weak Markov property. Actually, any mixture of psheet also satisfies this weak Markov property. So a mixture of psheet is a psheet, but where the parameter lambda can actually be random. And we proved that if we have a weakly Markovian random triangulation of the plane, then it has to be a psheet with a randomized parameter. And then the last step of the proof is to prove that actually, if we consider a limit of uniform finite triangulations, then this lambda has to be deterministic. And once we know this, we can actually characterize the lambda by using the fact that we know how to compute the average degree in the finite objects, just using the Euler formula. And we also know how to compute the average degree in the infinite objects by a different argument. And we can match the two to get the lambda as a function of theta. So this is the global strategy of the proof. First, tightness, and then probabilistic arguments on the subsequential limits until we can identify only one candidate for the subsequential limit. So I'm first going to discuss the tightness argument. So here we needed we followed the original tightness argument of Engel and Schramm, but Engel and Schramm had very precise combinatorial results. So Engel and Schramm worked in the planar case, where very nice combinatorial results are available. So here, what we did is that we looked closely at this paper of Engel and Schramm and identified the important property that is needed to obtain tightness in the paper of Engel and Schramm. And this important property is actually that the ratio between the number of triangulations of size n and genus G and of triangulations of size n-1 and genus G is bounded. So this is what we call the bounded ratio lemma. As long as the ratio between the genus and the size is bounded away from a half, the ratio of the enumerations when we add 1 to the size is bounded. So this is a purely combinatorial statement, and it has a quite nice combinatorial proof. So we need a slightly stronger version where we can add the boundary and the constant does not depend on the boundary, but I'm not going to go into the details here. So the idea is the following. First, if the ratio between the genus and the size is bounded away from a half, we've seen that the average degree is reasonable. The average degree is also bounded, which means that most of the vertices will have a reasonable degree. Now, let's imagine that we have found a good vertex V, so a vertex V with a reasonable degree, and we know its degree, which can only take finitely many values. Now I'm going to choose an edge, E, just like on this picture, joining my vertex V with a reasonable degree to another vertex V prime. Okay, so here I'm working in a triangulation of size n and genus G, and I want to turn it into a triangulation of size n-1 and genus still G. So if I have my edge E here joining a vertex of reasonable degree to another one, I can contract the edge E, which is going to turn two triangles into two gons, which are in blue, and then I can contract the two gons as well to get a triangulation of size n-1, because the number of triangulation of triangles has decreased by 2, and some marked edges. And basically, the fact that the vertex V had a reasonable degree in the beginning implies that there are not too many possible ways to do the same operation backwards, and this proves that the ratio is actually bounded. I'm not going to give all the details. And once we have this result, we can run the same tightness argument as what Angel and Schramm did. So the idea is roughly the following. What we want to prove is that the degree of the root, the degree of the root does not blow up. Once we know that, it's pretty standard that if the degree of the root is reasonable, since the root is picked uniformly at random, the root vertex has nothing special, then the neighbors of the root are also going to have a reasonable degree, and so will the neighbors of the neighbors, and so on. And if we know that all the degrees are reasonable, this is sufficient to ensure tightness for the local topology. So we want to prove that the degree of the root cannot be too high. And for this, we explore the neighborhood of the root. So here my root is this red vertex rho. Assume that at some point I have discovered a neighborhood of the root little t. The bounded ratio lemma ensures that with some positive probability, let's say probability larger than 1/1000, in the next steps of my exploration, the following is going to occur. So I'm going to go from the little piece t on the left to the little piece t plus on the right, which means that in a few exploration steps, I'm going to completely close the vertex rho and complete the exploration of the neighborhood of the root. And if we know that at each step we have a positive probability, we have probability at least 1/1000 to complete the exploration of the neighborhood of rho, this is sufficient to ensure that rho cannot have a too large degree. And then the tightness follows from standard arguments. So this is how we prove tightness. Now I'm going to explain quickly where the planarity comes from. So this is maybe one of the most surprising consequences of the result, that the neighborhood of a typical vertex is actually planar. For this, let's imagine that this is not the case and that my limit contains a small neighborhood of the root with a positive genus. So let's imagine this little t here. Then the probability to contain this little t as a neighborhood of the root in my infinite limit is equal to the limit to contain this little t as a neighborhood of the root in my finite triangulations. And as usual, this probability can be written as a quotient of two combinatorial quantities. And in the numerator, I will have the number of possible ways to fill this hole. And if I fill this hole, I will fill it with a triangulation of genus G-1, because I already have genus 1 on the left, so I need a genus G-1 on the right. And this is where we use this recursion on the number of triangulations with a fixed size and genus. So this is the Goulden-Jackson formula. And in particular, if I only look at the first term of the Goulden-Jackson formula, I can see that tau of ng is larger than something like n squared multiplied by tau of n-2 g-1. So the bounded ratio lemma tells us that passing from n to n-2 does not cost a lot. And what this formula, this inequality tells us is that passing from g to g-1 actually costs a lot. It costs a factor n squared. So this implies that in this quotient, the numerator is actually much, much smaller than the denominator. So when we let n go to infinity, we get that the probability to observe this little t with genus 1 as a neighborhood of the root goes to 0 when n goes to infinity. And for one-handedness, it's quite similar. So we need to estimate the property that a small neighborhood of the root separates my finite triangulation into 2 big parts. And this can be done also using the Goulden-Jackson formula, but this time by looking at the sum on the right. But I'm not going to give the details here. All right. So now at this point, we know that we have subsequential limits of T and Gn for the local topology, and any subsequential limit is planar and one-handed. So it can be nicely embedded in the plane. Another thing that we can observe, so this is something that I've said a little bit earlier, is that it's weakly Markovian in the sense that the probability to observe a small triangulation around the root only depends on its perimeter and its volume. So I can denote it by APV, where P is the perimeter and V is the volume. And what we proved is that this property is sufficient to ensure that that my subsequential limits have to be a mixture of Pschit, or equivalently a Pschit with a random parameter. So where does this come from? So I know that for a mixture of Pschit, these coefficients APV have the following form. They are the expectation of Cp of lambda times lambda to the V, where lambda is my randomized parameter of Pschit. Okay, I don't have much time left, so maybe I'm not going to describe the proof of this result. The basic idea is to first notice that we have a lot of equations linking together these coefficients, which implies that these coefficients APV are actually entirely determined by the coefficients A1V, so the coefficients describing triangulations of perimeter 1. But then, for a mixture of Pschit, this A1V, for this A1V, this C1 just becomes a constant. So we get that these have to be the moments of a random variable. So we have to prove that for any weakly Markovian triangulation, these A1V are the moments of some random variable. And we do so by using the Hausdorff moment problem. So to understand, to know that a certain sequence describes the moments of a certain random variable, we only need to prove a lot of inequalities on this sequence, and this can be done by just using the fact that all these coefficients APV are non-negative. Okay. Sorry if it's very quick, but I'm a bit out of time. I just wanted to keep a few minutes for the last step of the proof. So now we know that any subsequential limit of my uniform finite triangulations T and Gn is of the form a Pschit of parameter lambda, where lambda is random, and we want to prove that lambda is deterministic. In other words, we already know that if we take a uniform triangulation, T and Gn, and we pick the root uniformly at random on this triangulation, the neighborhood looks like a sheet with a certain parameter. And I'm first going to argue that if I fix my triangulation, this lambda does not depend on the choice of the root on this triangulation. For this, let's pick independently two roots, en1 and en2, on the same triangulation. So I take my triangulation uniformly at random, and then I pick two roots uniformly and independently on this triangulation. Then I observe a sheet with parameter lambda1 around the first root, and of parameter lambda2 around the second root. But if the two parameters lambda1 and lambda2 were different, I could swap a neighborhood of en1 and a neighborhood of en2. I would get this operation is an involution. This operation of swapping two neighborhoods is an involution. So what I see on the picture of the right is still uniform, which means that the neighborhood of a root in the picture on the right should still be uniform. So the neighborhood should still look like a sheet. But on the other hand, if lambda is different from lambda2, if lambda1 is different from lambda2, then the blue part is going to be very different from the yellow one, which means that this actually cannot be a piece of a sheet. So we get a contradiction. So this proves that if I fix a triangulation, then the lambda is the same everywhere. But on the other hand, the lambda is linked to the average degree, and we can kind of see it as a notion of curvature. So if we know the total curvature of the surface, and if we know that the average curvature is about the same everywhere, then we know what this curvature should be. The curvature should be everywhere equal to the average curvature. And what replaces the curvature here is the average degree. Okay. So we know that the average degree must be everywhere about the same. On the other hand, we are able to compute the average degree in these sheets. So we can finally match the average degree that we can compute in the sheet with the average degree that we can compute in a triangulation of fixed size and genus to obtain an equation linking lambda and theta. And this is enough to conclude that lambda actually has to be deterministic and a function of theta. Okay, so I'm just going to finish with a more recent result that we proved. A very natural question is this result restricted to triangulations? And we actually proved a similar result in a much more general setting. So we consider bipartite maps, which means that all the faces must have even degrees. We assume again that the genus is proportional to the size. So now the size is the total number of edges. And that we have prescribed face degrees. So we assume that we fix the number of faces of degree 2, of degree 4, of degree 6, and so on. We denote by alpha j the proportion of the faces that have degree 2j. We need an assumption that the degrees of the faces do not have a too heavy tail. So basically this is a second moment, a finite second moment assumption. And under this assumption, we have again a local convergence result. Uniform maps with prescribed phase degrees converges to an infinite random map of the plane, whose law depends only on the distribution of the phase degrees and this theta, which describes again the negative curvature. Okay. There are many other questions that we could ask. For example, what happens with a model with boundaries, or what can we say about global properties? But I have already talked a little bit about that when I answered one of your questions. So I'm going to stop here. Thank you for your attention.
Yeah, so let's thank Thomas. Yeah, this is great. So I have some questions, but I'd like to let other people ask questions first. So please, other people ask questions.
Hi, Thomas. So for the model with the boundary, so where do you think, which
hi, Greg.
step do you think is the hardest part? The tightness argument, is that a big problem because you don't have a good degree bound for the boundary vertices?
Yeah, so I think there are actually two different questions. There is what happens when the boundary is also proportional to the size, and
Yeah.
what happens if the boundary is large but still small compared to the size.
Yeah, I'm thinking the second case for the moment.
Okay, I think the second case is actually the most difficult one, because if the boundary is proportional to the size, there is not a big difference between routing uniformly in the map and routing uniformly on the boundary.
Mm-hmm.
And it's much more natural to route uniformly on the map, because then you can compute the average degree and everything. If you put the route uniformly on the boundary and boundary edges are very atypic in the map, you cannot say anything like that. So I would actually expect this to be the most difficult case.
So if the boundary is proportional to the volume and also the genus is proportional to the volume, you think in the local limit we are going to see the handles? Route it in the boundary.
No, so what I would expect to have in the local limit is basically to keep planarity but lose one-endedness. What we would get is some kind of tree we would get infinitely many infinite faces. So something actually pretty similar to the limit of unicellular maps, which is a tree. But we would have triangles or quadrangles in between the infinite faces. And for which part is going to be the most difficult, I would expect, I think the tightness part should be quite robust. We just need to find the right thing to replace one-endedness, because the limit is not going to be one-ended anymore. But for example, the bounded ratio lemma should be something very robust.
Yeah, if it's proportional, like I can see this should work, but
then, I mean, sometimes you're going to have two parts of the boundary which are very far away from each other along the boundary, but very close to each other in the graph. And you need to argue in some sense that you can forget exactly what is the location on the boundary of this point. You know, when you find a new point on the boundary, which was very far away along the boundary from the root, you would need an argument that you can actually forget what was the precise location, and this would probably be an important difficulty.
Okay, thank you.
So Gulnara asks, what about non-orientable surfaces in the chat?
I don't know. There's not been a lot of works on non-orientable maps. I think actually I'm not that sure that it would change much. Okay, I'm not exactly sure to understand what a non-orientable triangulation would look like, but for example, it's probably true that if you take a uniform triangulation homeomorphic to say the Klein bottle, the local limit would still be the UIPT. So I guess you can expect to get the same thing with the parameter of the sheet given by the total curvature of the surface. I mean, in a non-orientable map, you can still compute you can still use the Euler formula, compute the average degree, and Yeah, so I think it's very natural to expect similar results, but I don't know exactly what is available and what would be missing to adapt the arguments.
Yeah. So well, yeah, so does anybody else have a question? Gulnara asks, what is the limit in the orientable case if the genus is bounded? Oh, that's the UIPT.
Yeah. I don't think it's been written anywhere, but I think now combinatorists have some bijections about on non-orientable maps. So if it's not been done, it's probably something doable.
Yeah, do you have any idea or about the rate of convergence? I know this is kind of a strange question, but
no, not at all. I mean, in the planar case, everything is explicit. So basically, all the asymptotics follow from the Stirling formula. So if you have an error term in the Stirling formula, you have the convergence rate and everything you want. But here it's really tightness and then uniqueness of the limit. So this does not give anything quantitative.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, is that all of the techniques in the proof seem very soft. I mean, this is not a bad, because this makes it maybe more general or generalizable, but also means that we don't have like rates of convergence.
Yeah.
Is that?
Yeah. Maybe should mention that the least robust part of the proof is actually the last one here, this swapping argument. This is what caused us the most difficulties when we wanted to generalize to other models of maps, because we need to be able to find two neighborhoods of the two roots which have exactly the same length. So for triangulations, it's quite easy, because when we grow a neighborhood of the root, the length always can only increase by at most 1. So we know that it's going to hit the perimeter is going to hit every possible value. But if we start to add large faces, it becomes more difficult. If we consider more complicated models with, for example, labels or colors on the vertices, we need the boundary conditions to match. So it becomes basically impossible to run the same argument. So I think the beginning, for example, the bounded ratio lemma and the tightness argument are pretty robust, but the weaker point would be this one.
So out of curiosity, has anybody done, maybe you or somebody else has done some work on the PSHT with regards to like statistical models like percolation or Ising model or this kind of thing?
Yeah, so percolation has been done actually. So it was done by Gurab in the half planar versions of the PSHIT, but everything is done can be adapted to the PSHIT. So for example, it's possible to compute the critical probability for percolation. I mean, both critical probabilities, the one at which infinite clusters appear and the one at which there is only one infinite cluster. For Ising, usually when people work on the Ising model on random planar maps, they don't consider uniform planar maps and then put an Ising model on top of it. They prefer to pick the map, to pick the map biased by the partition function of the Ising model.
Oh, okay.
This is more natural from the probabilistic point of view. So there are some works on the Ising model. Actually, a lot of works on the Ising model on random planar maps, but it's still not very well understood. For example, we don't know what the order of magnitude of the distances would be. What's the fractal dimension of the limits that we get. For the Ising model on high genus maps, it's not been done. I think a natural first step would be to try to define the infinite models. So it's something that I have already tried a little bit. So it's not as easy to define the infinite models as it is in the uniform case, but it might be possible.
I see. So I guess my last question is I'm wondering about if there's anything spectral theory that's been done in this context, like you can ask about you kind of have a natural graph Laplacian, for example.
Yeah. So I don't think anyone has tried to do that. In the high genus case, basically, if we want an intuition of what these high genus look like from a global point of view, for most properties, looking at uniform free regular graphs gives a good intuition. So we can expect that spectral properties that are known for uniform free regular graphs should also be true in this context, but it's much more difficult. So yeah, there are a bit of works on isoperimetric inequalities, for example, in uniform triangulations of the sphere. There is a work by Le Gall and Beherici. There is also a project of Baptiste Louf to prove that it's possible to find large expander graphs in uniform unicellular maps of high genus. So usually, if we want to understand the properties of high genus maps, the easiest setting, maybe I should have mentioned, I should also have mentioned it in this talk. For example, the local limit is much simpler to establish for unicellular maps, so maps with only one faces instead of maps with all triangles, and this has been done by Gorab. So Baptiste has a project to prove that it's possible to find large expanders in uniform unicellular maps of high genus. So I think the result is that you can find an expander containing a proportion 1 minus epsilon of the faces, but you need the expansion constant to get worse and worse if you want to take epsilon very small. You cannot really hope for something better than that because it's still a random object. So everything that can happen somewhere will happen somewhere. So,
yeah. I guess, so...
you cannot hope for a positive Cheeker constant or something.
Right. I was wondering, right, if anything's been done with conformal circle packings, like so you have this triangulation, you can you can relate it to a circle packing in the sense of
Yeah,
Ulrich
yeah.
Schramm and others, right? Yeah.
Yeah, so indeed, there is this very nice paper by Benjamin and Schramm who proved that if we take a local limit, or what we now call a Benjamin-Schramm limit of planar graphs, then this limit is recurrent. Simple random walk on this limit is recurrent, and this uses the theory of circle packings. And this was provided the vertex degrees are uniformly bounded, which is quite a strong assumption. And this was extended by Gorel, Gurevich, and Narmias to the case where the tail of the degree of the root vertex is exponential. So in particular, this covers the UIPT and many other models. And there have also been, for example, there is a paper by Omer, Gurab, and Asaf Narmias and Tomasz Croft, where they study the behavior of the circle packing on unimodular triangulations, and they prove that. I don't remember exactly what they prove, but they study the circle packing, for example, that.
Right. I
that the fact
this,
that the circle packing can fill the whole plane is, I mean, basically it's the equivalence between many possible definitions of hyperbolicity for unimodular triangulation, and one of them is that it's possible to circle pack it in a bounded domain. So yeah, it's been studied actually in a rather general setting. Like it's not something specific to the pshits, but it's been studied in the general setting of unimodular triangulation.
Yeah.
Maybe Gurab can add something.
Oh, he wrote in the chat that he has to go.
He left. Okay.
So anybody else have a question? Let's thank Thomas again. So a great talk. Thanks. I find this paper very inspirational, by the way. So and maybe I'll be emailing you questions.
No problem. Don't hesitate.
Okay, so I gotta go. So thanks again.
Okay. Bye, and thanks for the invitation.
Okay.